6 trucks sat loaded at the dock, waiting on a seal I no longer had. My son had told the buyer I'd gone senile. He forgot the seal wasn't his to give. Standing outside a gate you built with your own hands, watching it not open for you. That's a specific kind of cold. Not slammed shut, not chained. Just quietly refused, like the gate itself forgot who you were and nobody bothered to remind it. For 40 years I was the man who decided whether grain moved. Odell Hendricks, 71, federally certified grain inspector, badge 114, Platte Valley Grain Cooperative. Out in the flat middle of Nebraska where the wind doesn't stop for anything. I tested moisture. I checked for mold and vomitoxin and broken kernels. I signed the papers that told buyers in Omaha, in Kansas City, sometimes clear down to the Gulf, that what they were paying for was what they thought they were paying for. My name meant something on those papers. Still does, far as I'm concerned, whether the front office remembers it this week or not. My wife Alina used to say I loved that job more than I loved sleeping in on a Saturday, and she wasn't wrong about much. She'd bring coffee out to the truck before sunup, stand there in her robe with her arms crossed against the cold, watching my headlights swing up the gravel road and say, "There he goes." Off to save the world 1 bushel at a time. She had a way of teasing me that never once made me feel small, which is rarer than people think. I lost her 4 years back. Heart, the doctors said, though I've always figured grief gets to a man's heart long before any machine catches it. After she was gone, the house got too quiet. I'd hear the refrigerator kick on from the bedroom. I'd hear my own boots on the kitchen floor and start to feel like the house was listening to me instead of the other way around. So when Ryan asked me to move closer, out to the newer end of town where he and Sable had built a place with a guest suite off the back, I said yes before he'd even gotten the sentence out. Told myself it was for the company. Told myself I'd still make the 15-minute drive out to the co-op every morning, same as always. And for a while, that's exactly what happened. That morning started like 1,000 before it. Up before the sun, same as I'd been doing since I was 31. Coffee in the same dented percolator Alina bought off a farm auction table the year we got married. You keep some habits going even after the person who started them is gone, maybe especially then. Canvas jacket, the one with the co-op patch stitched crooked on the shoulder because I sewed it on myself back in '87 and never did get the hang of a straight line. Hand went to my shirt pocket for the badge the way it goes for my keys, no thought involved, just muscle doing what muscle does. Everything about that morning was ordinary. That's exactly why what happened next landed the way it did. The drive out took me past the same fence lines I'd watched not quite change for 4 decades. The Nielsen place, the old Lutheran church with the bent steeple, the grain bins standing up gray against a grayer sky like they were the only thing in the county that refused to shrink. I pulled up to the gate the way I'd pulled up 10,000 times, rolled the window down, reached for the badge. My hands aren't what they were, but that motion is 39 years deep in them. I didn't have to think about where the badge sat. I never do. The scanner blinked red. Figured it was the cold, old equipment does that. Tried again, held it steady. Red again. That's when Denny came out of the guard shack, and I wanted on record that Denny is not a bad kid. 26 maybe, working the gate part-time to help cover community college. Always calls me Mr. Hendricks, like his mother raised him right. But that morning he came out with his shoulders already apologizing before his mouth caught up, rubbing the back of his neck like he wished the gravel would just open and take him somewhere else. Mr. Hendricks, he held up a printed sheet like it was something he'd rather not be holding. Got a note here, says you're retired as of this morning. Says I'm not supposed to let the badge through no more. I asked him who signed off on that, because in 40 years, nobody had ever once needed to tell me I was done working without me being in the room to hear it. He looked down at the paper again, like it might have changed since the last time he read it, and said it came down from the front office. From Mr. Hendricks, meaning Ryan. Before the sun was even fully up. I sat there with the engine running, and the badge still out the window, like it might start working if I just gave it another second. Some part of me wanted to say something sharp, the kind of thing a man's supposed to say when his own son closes a door on him without so much as a phone call. What came instead was just my jaw going tight and my ears going hot. That old feeling from getting dressed down as a young man by some plant manager who thought volume was the same thing as being right. Nobody was yelling at me now. Denny sure wasn't the enemy. He was just a boy at a gate, holding somebody else's decision like it was heavier than it looked. I told him it was fine, probably some mix-up, and backed the truck around in that gravel lot the way I had 10,000 times. Except this time the tires sounded too loud under me, like the whole morning had gone quiet just to listen to me leave. Drove past the elevator, past the scale house where I'd weighed in trucks before half these newer men were even born, and didn't look at it in the mirror. My hand found my jacket pocket on its own and closed around the seal, that small hard weight of metal I'd carried every working day since Nixon was in office, cool against my fingers, like it was waiting on me to figure out what any of this meant. The drive home felt twice as long as it should have. I ran the last few weeks back through my head the way you check a fence line after a bad storm, hunting for the place where something must have come loose without you noticing. Ryan had been quieter at supper lately, quick with his phone, quicker to end a conversation. Sable had started asking little questions about the co-op's paperwork, dressed up as harmless curiosity, the kind I hadn't thought twice about answering, because why would my own daughter-in-law care how a transfer of inspection authority actually gets filed? There'd been a locksmith's van in the driveway of the old inspection office one afternoon, which Ryan waved off as reorganizing storage. None of it much on its own. Sitting in that truck with a dead badge in one hand and a warm seal in my pocket, it stopped feeling like nothing. It felt like pieces of something laid out in a line I couldn't unsee anymore, and I drove the rest of the way with my knuckles gone pale on the wheel, wondering how long my own son had been planning to lock me out of the one place that still remembered who I was. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I'd about talked myself out of making anything of it. That's the part about getting older nobody warns you for. You get so practiced at giving people the benefit of the doubt. You'll do it when the doubt's standing right in front of you wearing your own son's face. Figured Denny had bad paperwork. Figured Ryan would laugh when I brought it up. Call it some clerical mess with the county board, and we'd straighten it out over coffee like two reasonable men. I actually believed that, walking through the back door. Tells you something about how hard a man will work to keep from seeing what's right in front of him. Found out different that same week, on a Thursday, when Carl Voss came by the house. Carl handles the co-op's line of credit over at the regional bank. Decent fellow, known him 15 years, mostly through nodding at each other at the elevator. Ryan had him over for coffee to talk financing, and I came in from the yard in my work boots, meaning to say hello and get out of the way. Sable was pouring coffee, and before I'd even gotten my boots off at the mat, she said it loud enough for the whole kitchen. "Don't mind Odell, Carl. He still thinks he runs the place." "Bless him, he's just a little past his prime these days." Said it with a smile built to make whoever's on the other end look foolish for reacting. Carl gave a polite little laugh, the way you do at a kitchen table, and I stood there in my socks with my boots in my hand, feeling 40 years of work folded up small enough to fit inside one sentence. I laughed too, not proud of that. Said something about how a man my age is allowed to think he still knows a thing or two, poured myself a cup, sat down at that table like nothing had happened, because the other option was making a scene in my son's kitchen in front of a bank man, and 4 decades of keeping composure on a loading dock had trained that clean out of me. But it sat in my chest the rest of the morning, heavy and familiar, the same weight I used to carry as a young inspector, when some plant manager twice my size tried to talk over me about moisture content he didn't half understand. I knew that weight. Didn't expect to feel it at my own son's table, is all. The second wound came 2 days later, and it caught me from a direction I wasn't watching. Still had my truck keys, still had the habit, so I drove out that Saturday anyway, told myself I'd just check on a few things, even with the badge dead in my pocket. Nobody stopped me walking the grounds. Half those men had known me longer than they'd known their own supervisors. I walked past the old inspection office, the cinderblock building, where I'd kept my logbooks and scale calibration records for 20-some years, and found a brand new padlock hanging on the door, shiny brass against a rust-streaked hasp, a lock that had never once been there in all my time in that building. I stood in front of it a good long minute, my hand not quite touching it, the way you'd stand in front of a door in a house that used to be yours and isn't anymore. Though nobody's told you that in so many words. Called Ryan that evening, kept my voice level. Alina always said that was my tell. How even I got when I was trying hardest not to sound hurt. He told me it was nothing. The board wanted the old records room reorganized for storage. They were consolidating files and needed it locked during the work. Said it fast, the way a man talks when he's rehearsed the answer before the question even landed. I told him fine, made sense. Storage needs a lock. Told myself that too. Driving home with the dash, light's the only warm thing in the truck. Wanted it to be true bad enough that it'd be true bad enough be true for most of a day, the way you'll keep trusting a forecast even after you've already felt the first drops on your neck. The third wound came out of nowhere, the way the worst ones do. Stopped by the house one evening to drop off some tomatoes off my little patch, and heard Ryan's voice down the hall from his home office. Door open a crack, that clipped fast tone he uses when he figures nobody's listening. Caught pieces. Something about a rush shipment needing to be finalized by end of week. The buyer already committed, not wanting delays, handling the paperwork, in-house, so nobody else had to sign off. I stood in that hallway with a bag of tomatoes going soft in my hand, and every instinct 4 decades deep in me said the same thing. No rush shipment moves out of that elevator without an inspector's signature. Nobody had asked for mine, told myself. Right there in the hall, maybe there was some new inspector I hadn't met, some younger fellow brought on to modernize things while I eased into a retirement. Nobody had bothered running past me. Told myself Ryan was allowed to handle his own business without looping his old man in on every detail. I told myself a lot that week, mostly because the other option meant looking straight at what my own son might be capable of. And a father doesn't go looking for that kind of clarity over a bag of garden tomatoes. Left the bag on the counter, let myself out the back before he even knew I'd been there, and drove home turning that word, rush, over in my head like a stone. I couldn't put down and couldn't stop touching either. 2 nights later, couldn't sleep, so I went digging through the old banker's box in my closet. Copies of every certification renewal and authority filing I'd signed over the years. More habit than suspicion, honestly, just wanting something solid in my hands. And there, tucked in a folder I hadn't opened in years, I found a photocopy that didn't belong. A transfer request form, dated 3 weeks back, with a signature line at the bottom that was supposed to be mine and wasn't. The hand leaned the wrong way. The date didn't match anything I remembered signing. Not that week or any other. I sat on the edge of my bed at 1 in the morning, with that paper in my hands, and something in my chest went very still and very cold, because whatever this was, it hadn't started with a rush shipment or a padlock. It had started a good while before I ever noticed, and I was only now catching up to how far along it already was. Didn't sleep the rest of that night. Sat at the kitchen table with the forged form under the lamp, reading it over the way you read a diagnosis you're hoping might change if you stare at it long enough. By 4 in the morning, I'd landed on something that felt less like a choice than a thing my hands had already decided before my head signed off on it. I was driving out to the co-op's real records office, the one with the county filing stamps, and finding out for myself whether any transfer of my authority had ever actually gone anywhere, to anyone. Got there before the office opened, which worked in my favor, since Marlene at the front desk has known me since '96, and has never once needed a reason to let me look at something. Told her I was doing some personal record keeping before I retired for real. And she believed me, the way people believe a man who's never given them cause not to. She let me into the archive room, left me alone with 4 decades of my phone paperwork, stacked in gray boxes, and I started at the newest folder and worked backward, the way I used to trace a bad lot of grain back to whatever field it came off of. The transfer file was thin. First wrong thing I noticed, a real transfer, the kind I'd processed for other retiring inspectors over the years, runs 8-10 pages, application, background review, a supervised handover period, signed acknowledgement from both outgoing and incoming inspector, filed with the state board, stamped received. What I had in front of me was a single page, no state stamp anywhere in the system, referencing a transfer that had never once left this building, no supervised handover, no second signature that could have belonged to anyone but the one already sitting in my closet, the one with the wrong leaning hand. Whoever built this had built it to look complete to anybody who didn't know better. A stage set that passes for a real room until you walk around back and find the plywood holding it up. Sat with that folder open a long while before I made myself dig further, because some part of me already knew the next box was going to hurt worse. It did, buried in a vendor ledger I had no real business looking through except my hands kept moving on their own. I found a supplier account under a name I didn't recognize, Cornstalk Ag Solutions, pulling payments from the co-op's operating fund going back almost 2 years. Small at first. A few hundred here, 1,000 there, the kind of amount that doesn't trip an audit on its own. Address on file was a post office box in Kearney. The signature authorizing every last payment belonged to Sable. I'd like to tell you something dramatic went through me right then. Some crack of thunder, but what I actually felt was smaller and colder than that. My hands went still on the folder. My breathing got careful, the way it does when you're trying not to jostle something that might still break. I thought about Alina at our kitchen table 30 years back, laughing at me for triple-checking a moisture log before I'd sign off on it. "Odell," she'd say, shaking her head, "it's just paperwork. Nobody's whole life rides on a piece of paper." I remember telling her people's whole lives ride on paper all the time. A farmer's entire year comes down to what gets written and whether it's true. She'd smile and let it drop because she loved me, even when she figured I took my work too seriously. Sitting in that archive room 40 years on, I finally understood the thing I never explained right to her back then. Paper's how the truth gets to outlast whoever wants it gone. The third box put it all together, and it landed harder than anything else that morning. Tucked behind a stack of moisture reports was a shipping manifest, dated for that Friday. Forges out, listing 6 trucks scheduled to move a lot out of bin 12. The same bin I'd flagged 11 days earlier, before my badge quit working, for elevated vomitoxin, off water damage from a bad storm. I remembered standing in front of that bin myself, running the test twice because the first reading seemed too high to believe. Writing hold. "Do not ship" across the top of my own sheet in block letters. Somebody had pulled that lot back out of hold and scheduled it to move under my authority. With a signature that wasn't mine, 4 days ahead of the same Friday deadline, Ryan had been discussing on the phone behind that cracked office door. The rush shipment wasn't some ordinary job I'd been left off of. It was contaminated grain, my name, 40 years of never once letting a bad lot through, about to go out that gate on a forged release. Drove home with the manifest folded inside my jacket next to the seal, and I don't remember much of the road between the co-op and my own driveway. What I remember is Ryan's truck already parked out front, earlier than usual, and Ryan himself on the porch, with his arms crossed, watching me climb out like he already knew where I'd been. "Dad," he said, before I'd even shut the door, "we need to talk about the transfer paperwork." Just so everybody's on the same page before Friday. Same rehearsed evenness I'd heard through that cracked door, the tone of a man who's already decided how a conversation goes and is only waiting on the other fellow to catch up. I stood there with the manifest against my ribs, looking at my son's face, hunting for some trace of the boy, who used to ride shotgun with me out to the elevator on Saturday mornings. For a second, I genuinely couldn't tell which one of us was about to be more surprised by how this went. Followed him inside without answering, mostly to buy myself a minute, to figure out how much of what I knew I was ready to lay on the table. He led me into the kitchen, pulled a folder off the counter, set it down like a man laying out a winning hand. One sheet inside, freshly printed, acknowledgement of voluntary retirement and transfer of inspection duties, and under it, blank, waiting on my signature. "It's just a formality, Dad." He tapped the page twice with 2 fingers. "Board wants it on file." The handover went smooth, no confusion. "You sign, we're square, everybody moves on," said it fast, like cue cards. And his eyes didn't quite land on mine the whole time he talked. I looked at that blank line longer than I needed to, because some part of me wanted bad for this to be exactly what he said. Thought about his boy, my grandson, Micah, 6 years old, calls me Poppy, thinks my old truck's the best truck in the world on account of the bench seat he can slide across. Thought about his birthday 3 months back. Micah, asleep against my arm on the porch swing, sticky with cake, and how Ryan looked at the 2 of us a second, like something in him gave before he caught it and went back inside. Told myself a father doesn't tear his son's life apart over a piece of paper. Told myself Alina would have wanted me to give him one honest chance to explain himself, man to man, before I let this go any further than a kitchen counter. Ryan kept my voice even. Walk me through it. Who filed the actual transfer with the state board? Because I looked. Couldn't find it. His jaw tightened, just barely. But I've read faces across a scalehouse counter for 40 years, and I know what it looks like when a man's story runs out of road faster than he planned for. Said the filing was in process. The board's slow. These things take time. I shouldn't worry about the technical end and just trust he had it handled. He nudged the pen a half-inch closer to my hand, like proximity alone might finish what his words couldn't. Cheap giveaway pen from the seed dealer down the road. I looked at that thing sitting there and thought about how much damage a person can do with something that small if nobody stops to ask why it's being handed to them. Told him I needed to sit with it. A man doesn't sign away 40 years of his name without sleeping on it, and watched something behind his eyes go from patient to sharp in about half a second. "Dad, there isn't time to sleep on it." Voice dropped into a register I hadn't heard since he was a teenager arguing curfew. "Shipment's Friday. This isn't settled by then. It's a mess for everybody. Including you." Asked him plainly what kind of mess he meant. He backed off the words, even as his face kept saying them. Something about liability, about old inspectors who don't know when to let go of the reins. I picked up my coffee cup instead of answering, because my hands needed something to do, and because I didn't trust what would come out of my mouth if I let it move first. Drove home that evening with the folder still sitting unsigned on Ryan's counter, and sat a long while in my own kitchen before I let myself pick up the phone. Grace Doyle and I worked adjoining territories for the USDA's regional office the better part of 20 years. Back, she was still cutting her teeth on moisture meters, and I was already the old hand training half the new inspectors coming through. She'd moved up to federal compliance work a decade back, real weight to that job once a shipment crosses state lines, and still called every so often to talk shop and complain about winter wheat prices. I told her everything: the badge, the padlock, the forged signature, the manifest, the bin I'd flagged 11 days before somebody quietly reopened it. She went quiet on her end in a way that told me she was taking it seriously, not humoring an old friend out of politeness. "Odell," she said finally, "let me check something. Call you back within the hour." When she called back, the warmth had gone clean out of her voice. Said she'd pulled the federal transfer database herself, the one that has to update the second an inspection authority changes hands on anything crossing state lines. And there was nothing there either. No application, no pending review, nothing with Ryan's name or mine on any current filing. Whoever's been telling people this transferred, she said, hasn't told anyone who actually has the authority to make that true. I asked her straight if she'd be willing to be at the loading dock Friday morning. Not as a favor to me, but because a shipment of contaminated grain was about to move under a forged signature, which sat squarely in her jurisdiction whether I existed or not. She didn't hesitate. I'll be there before the trucks are loaded. You did right calling me instead of trying to handle this yourself. Couldn't settle into anything that night. Sat at the kitchen table with the seal in front of me, turning it slow in my fingers, feeling the raised letters of Certified Inspector 114 press cool grooves into my thumb the way they had every working morning of my adult life. Around 9, my phone buzzed. A text from Petey, one of the younger loaders I'd trained years back, still checks in about weather and equipment sometimes. Mentioning, almost in passing, 6 trucks were being staged that night for a 5 a.m. pickup Friday, earlier than the usual schedule. Like somebody wanted those trucks gone before most of the county was even awake to see it. Read that message twice, set the phone down next to the seal, and knew there wasn't going to be any more sleeping on it. Whatever this cost me, I already knew where I needed to be standing at 5 o'clock Friday morning. And I already knew what I needed to be holding when I got there. I got to the dock at 20 to 5, before the sun had even thought about coming up. And the cold out there had real teeth in it. 6 trucks sat in a row along the concrete apron, engines idling, headlights cutting flat white lines through the frost on the gravel, the whole yard smelling the way it always does before a shipment moves. Diesel and dust and that sweet rot smell off grain that's sat too long in a damp bin. Parked off to the side, away from the office lights. Sat there a minute, with the seal in my coat, and the certification file on the seat beside me. Breath fogging the windshield, telling myself there was still time to turn around and make this somebody else's problem. Didn't turn around. Got out. Gravel crunched loud under my boots in a yard otherwise dead, quiet except for those engines. Ryan stood near the scale house with a fellow I didn't know, younger man in a company jacket, clipboard under his arm, and Sable stood off a few feet with her phone in her hand, not looking at the screen, just holding it because her hands needed something to do. Ryan was talking, fast, gesturing at a folder the buyer's man was flipping through, and I caught pieces walking closer across that gravel. Temporary authorization, boards aware, just formalities left to finish. The buyer's man looked up when he saw me coming, and something in his face shifted, the way a man's face does when he senses the ground under a deal isn't as solid as he'd been told. "Dad," Ryan said it sharp, stepping toward me before I'd even reached the trucks, putting himself half between me and the buyer's man like a body could block a conversation. "This isn't the time. We're finalizing the load." Told him I understood that fine, that I wasn't there to finalize anything. I was there to make sure the load matched what the paperwork actually said. Which happened to be my job, whether anybody in that yard remembered hiring me for it or not. He tried laughing it off for the buyer's benefit, something about his old man being sentimental, easier for this generation to handle the business side. The buyer's man didn't laugh along. He was looking at the folder in his own hands, then back at me doing the math a stranger does when he realizes 2 people are telling him 2 different stories about the same shipment. That's when Grace Doyle's truck came up the drive, headlights sweeping the row of parked semis, and I watched Ryan's whole posture change before she'd even opened her door. Everybody at that co-op knew Grace Doyle's truck cuck. The federal decal, the way she carried a clipboard like it weighed more than it did. She got out in her work coat, badge already clipped to her collar, walked past Ryan without much of a hello, came right to me. I handed her the seal first, set it flat in her palm, metal still cold from riding in my coat all night, then laid the certification file open on the tailgate of the nearest truck, transfer page on top. The one with no state stamp, no second signature that meant a thing. Grace read it right there in the headlights, flipping pages with the kind of unhurried care that told everybody watching she wasn't about to be rushed by anybody's shipping schedule. Ryan tried once more, telling her the paperwork was in process with the state board. Same line he'd used at his own kitchen counter. And Grace looked up at him with an expression I'd only seen on her once before, years back, catching a shipper falsifying moisture readings. There's no transfer on file. Loud enough the buyer's man caught every word clean over the idling engines. Not with the state board, not with the federal registry. Mr. Hendricks is still the certified inspector of record for this facility, and nothing moves out of bin 12 under an authority that doesn't exist. The yard went quiet, except for the trucks. 6 diesel engines running exactly as loud as before, only now sounding like they were running for nothing at all. The buyer's man closed his folder without being asked, said something short and flat about needing to call his office before anything moved another inch, and walked back to his own vehicle without looking at Ryan again. The kind of exit a man makes, once he's already decided which version of this he's telling his supervisor. Sable had gone very still by the scale house, a phone finally down at her side, watching Grace write something into a small notebook pulled from her coat, and I saw the exact second Sable understood this wasn't stopping at one canceled shipment. Grace told Ryan, plain leak, she'd be opening a formal inquiry into the transfer filing and the shipment record, and she'd need full access to the cooperative's vendor accounts as part of it. I watched Sable's jaw go tight at that last part, in a way that told me she already knew exactly which account Grace meant. Ryan turned to me then, and for a second the anger dropped clean off his face, and something younger came through. That same look he used to give me as a boy after breaking something, before he'd worked out how to undo it. "Dad, you didn't have to do this in front of everybody." Quieter now, the fight gone out of him. I looked at him standing there in the cold, with those trucks idling behind him, going nowhere, and thought about a padlock on a door that used to be mine, a signature that wasn't, a bin I'd flagged with my own hand, 11 days before somebody decided my name could be borrowed, without asking first. That seal was never yours to give. Didn't raise my voice saying it. Grace was already on her phone with dispatch. The buyer's man was already halfway to his truck, and 6 loaded trucks sat going nowhere in the gray coming light, engines running for a shipment that wasn't moving that morning, maybe wasn't ever moving again. The inquiry moved faster than I expected. Grace called 9 days later. Investigation into the shipment had widened into a full review of the cooperative's vendor accounts, and Cornstalk Ag Solutions had turned out to be exactly what it looked like on paper. A shell account, no seed or fertilizer ever actually delivered, just a post office box in Kearney, and 2 years of quiet withdrawals under Sable's signature. The board suspended Ryan from any operational role within the week, pending the outcome of the food fraud investigation, and Carl Voss's bank called in the line of credit Ryan had used to cover his futures losses, which put the house he and Sable built up for sale inside a month. I can't say I felt triumphant hearing any of it. Felt more like the particular kind of tired that comes from watching something you built get used as a weapon and then watching the weapon break in somebody's hands. Ryan came to my door on a Sunday, about 3 weeks after the dock, standing on the porch in a coat that looked too big on him now. Like the month had taken something out of his frame, along with everything else. I didn't ask to come in right away. Stood there with his hands jammed in his pockets, and told me he'd been drowning close to 2 years wet. The futures had gone bad faster than he could cover. Sable had brought him the shell vendor idea before he'd fully understood what he was agreeing to, and by the time he did understand, he'd told himself one bad shipment could make the whole mess vanish before anybody noticed. Said he was sorry. I believe he was, the way a man's sorry once the cost finally lands on him instead of somebody else. Told him I heard him. Told him hearing him didn't undo 11 days of a bin I'd flagged hold getting reopened under my own name without my say. Didn't tell him it was fine. Didn't tell him we'd put it behind us like none of it happened. Because some things a father can't smooth over just because his son's standing there looking smaller than he used to. What I told him was I'd still be in Micah's life, still be at the boys' ball games, Still take him out in the truck on Saturday mornings if Ryan would let me. But I wasn't writing letters to the state board on his behalf, and I wasn't going to sit across from Grace or anybody else and pretend this had been some family misunderstanding. He nodded at that, slower than I expected, like some part of him already knew that was the only honest answer I had in me. Sable didn't come to the door with him. Haven't spoken to her since that morning at the dock. Understand she's got her own doors to knock on these days, and none of them are mine. The board called me in early October. First real frost of the season laid out white across the lot and asked if I'd consider coming back as an honorary inspection consultant, mostly to help train the two younger inspectors they'd brought on and to walk them through the old certification protocols nobody else fully understood the history of. Said yes before the man even finished his sentence. Same way I'd said yes to Ryan's guest suite all those years back, except this time the yes felt like it was heading towards something instead of away from something. Cleaned out my old jacket, the one with the crooked patch, and found the seal exactly where I'd left it in the pocket. Metal a little warmer now, sitting less like evidence and more like a tool again. 2 Saturdays back, I stood at that same scale house, where Denny once turned my badge away, running a moisture test on a load of new wheat with Micah up on an overturned bucket beside me so he could see over the counter. He wanted to know what the numbers meant, why some grain got a green sticker and some didn't, and I found myself explaining it the same patient way I once explained it to inspectors 20 years his senior. Reading came back clean. Pressed the seal down into the wax on the certification tag myself, firm and even Certificate Inspector 114 stamped clear into the paper, and Micah asked could he touch it before it dried. Let him. He pressed one small finger against the edge of the raised letters and looked up at me like he'd just been let in on something that mattered. In its own way, he had. I think about Alina more than usual these days, especially in that scale house with the cold smell of fresh grain hanging in the air. She used to tell me I took my paperwork too seriously, that no life could really ride on a signature or a stamped date, and I let her tease me over it 30 years running, because I loved the sound of her laughing at me more than I cared about being right. Understand now what I never quite got across to her back then. A signature's just ink, right up until somebody tries to steal it off you, and then you find out it was never just ink at all. It was 40 years of showing up. 40 years of getting it right when it would have been easier not to. 40 years nobody gets to erase with a padlock or a borrowed name, no matter how scared or how desperate they get. If there's a place in your own life where somebody tried to write you out of a role you spent years earning, a job, a seat at a table, a name on a door, I'd like to hear how you held your ground, or how you're still working up to it. That's mostly why I keep telling mine. This story uses recreated characters and events to reflect on family, boundaries, dignity, and healing.